In the thick of snow and darkness, a woman walks on the edge of death with 3 newborn babies pressed against her chest. Her homestead turned to ashes, her past shattered to pieces. She cannot imagine that she's about to encounter the man they all call Iron Bear, a feared mountain man whose destiny will intertwine with hers in ways neither could foresee. What secrets will be revealed beneath the storm? How far will a woman go to protect what she loves most? When duty and desire become irreconcilable enemies. Hello, my dear friend. Before we start, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. A big hug to you all, and I hope you enjoy the story. Colorado Territory, United States, winter of 1862. The wind howled fiercely from the north, carrying with it the scent of smoke, blood, and charred timber. The Morrison homestead, built between red dust plains and brush hardened by sun, burned like a torch in the twilight. Roof shingles exploded one by one. The barn collapsed with thunderous noise, and the screams of the few farmhands who hadn't fled mixed with the brutal voices of Confederate raiders drunk on gunpowder and plunder. Sarah, wrapped in a nightgown that barely covered her body, exhausted from recent childbirth, held against her chest her 3 children, Benjamin, Thomas, and little Mary. They were barely days old. Their faces, tiny and reddened by cold, trembled with hunger beneath hastily torn curtain fabric she'd fashioned into blankets. Her belly still ached. Her skin burned with fever, but there was no time to think of pain, only to run. She ran barefoot, stumbling over sharp stones on the dirt road, lungs seared by smoke. A gunshot whistled near her ear. She didn't look back, couldn't look. If she did, perhaps she wouldn't have strength to keep going. The voice of her dead husband, Samuel Morrison, still echoed in her memory. A harsh voice, absent, that would never have protected her. Now she was alone with 3 lives hanging from her arms like broken wings. The wilderness showed no mercy. The day's sun embraced without clemency, and at night the cold bit her bones. She walked for 4 days, drinking from puddles, feeding her children what little her body could offer. Her feet cracked, her lips split into sores. A farmhand she'd trusted stole the only bag of bread she carried and fled with a cowardly smile while she begged for her children's sake. "God curse you," Sarah murmured, but her voice had no strength even to curse. On the 5th day, clouds began closing over the horizon. A white veil descended slowly over the hills. Snow, like a promise of death, began to fall, first in soft flakes, then in increasingly dense gusts. Sarah pushed into the dried brush, covering the babies with her body. The air grew thicker with each breath. Her breathing was a broken whimper. The world seemed to disappear under the white blanket. She knelt beside a dead tree, embracing her children as if she could melt into them. "Don't take me without them," she whispered skyward. But there was no sky or stars anymore, only the icy silence of a wilderness transformed into a tomb. Her eyelids fell, her body's trembling ceased. The triplets, wrapped in the shawl's folds, cried weakly, as if they too understood the end was approaching. It was then the crunch of footsteps through snow was heard. From a nearby ridge, Jeremiah watched the motionless bundle in the clearing. His face was covered by a weathered fur hood, and a thick coat protected his shoulders from ice. His eyes, dark as volcanic stone, showed no surprise or pity, only caution. He approached with a hunter's wariness. Pulling away the frozen blanket, he found the woman's face. Young, pale, covered with frost, lips blue, eyelashes wet. Blood stained the hem of her dress. Beneath her, 3 creatures trembled weakly, their tiny hands closing into fists against the cold. Jeremiah stepped back. An invisible shudder ran down his spine. An image struck his memory with a lance's force. His dying wife beneath a fire lit by cavalry soldiers. His newborn daughter, her neck twisted in a basket. This wasn't a vision. It was a cruel mirror returning from the past. He could turn around. He could let them die. His clan would never reproach him for choosing indifference, but the eyes of one baby opened and looked at him, not with fear or rancor, only with the innocence of one who doesn't yet know the world. Jeremiah unsheathed his knife, tore part of his coat, wrapped the children precisely, then lifted the woman in his arms. She was so light, she seemed made of ash. Her body burned, she murmured senseless phrases. Her hair, stuck to her forehead, smelled of smoke and dried milk. They walked for hours through the snowy forest. Behind him his men waited with stern expressions. One raised his voice. "Why do you carry a dead woman?" Jeremiah didn't answer. He kept walking. The red scar crossing his forehead marked even deeper under the snowfall, like a living wound, like a promise of war. That night, in the middle of ice and rejection, a foreign woman was carried to the heart of a clan that didn't want her, and unknowingly, in the arms of the most feared man of those lands, her destiny began to be rewritten. The whisper of wind slipped through the leather seams of the tent, carrying the penetrating aroma of pine smoke. Upon waking, Sarah didn't know if she was still alive. Her body felt heavy as if it didn't belong to her, and her eyes burned when trying to open. A reddish light, trembling, flickered near her face, casting long shadows on walls of cured hide. She didn't remember how she'd arrived there. She tried to sit up, but sharp pain in her side forced her to lie back down. Only then did she hear the sounds. A slight creak of wood, soft steps on hardened earth, the faint breathing of a creature beside her. She looked down with effort and saw, wrapped in a piece of mountain man blanket, the sleeping face of one of her children. The child's tanned skin contrasted with the earthy cloth. He was alive. That simple fact seemed a miracle. Her dry lips pronounced a barely audible name, Benjamin. But the child didn't react. Neither did Thomas nor Mary, whom she glimpsed a bit farther, clumsily wrapped lying on warm hides. Beside her, a steaming vessel gave off a strange smell, a mix of bitter herbs and something she couldn't name. She tried to raise her hand, but her arm trembled. She felt herself floating in a thick, warm sea as if her blood moved slowly within her. At that moment, the tent entrance opened. An imposing figure was outlined against the exterior light. It was a tall man with broad shoulders, wrapped in a hide cloak. He had long hair tied with a leather band and a stern face. His dark eyes settled first on the children, then on her. That man uttered no word, simply nodded toward the interior. Behind him, another person entered, an elderly woman with a face wrinkled like dried bark, white hair braided and adorned with shells. The old woman approached with firm steps, took the vessel, stirred it with a bone spoon, and blew on the surface. Then, without saying a word, she placed the infusion in front of Sarah and gestured for her to drink. She wanted to speak, but her tongue was a knot. "Where am I?" she whispered. The old woman didn't respond, only pointed to the infusion. Sarah understood. She brought the cup to her lips with difficulty. The taste was bitter, penetrating, almost unbearable, but the warmth descended down her throat like comfort, and for the first time in days, she felt her body stop resisting the world. When the old woman left, the man followed. Before disappearing, he turned for an instant. In his eyes was something more than sternness. There was questioning, distrust, and a shadow Sarah couldn't yet name. During the following days, the world became a cycle of diffuse light, whispers in unknown tongue, footsteps coming and going outside the tent. Sarah barely understood what occurred around her. A young woman, always silent, brought a bowl of porridge each morning. Another with a stern face changed the children's blankets. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her directly. The few times she tried to get up, the healer forced her back down. She applied wet cloths to her forehead, gave her infusions to drink, and chewed roots before placing the juice in her mouth. It was care without tenderness, without words, but constant. Little by little, Sarah regained some strength. She learned the old woman was called Singing Crane, that the man who'd brought her was called Jeremiah, that the others didn't want her there. One midday she heard raised voices outside the tent. They were men arguing in their mountain dialect. She didn't understand the content, but recognized the tone. They were furious. One of them mentioned her name, pronounced with clumsy accent, Sarah, and something inside her froze. Singing Crane, who ground herbs by the fire, didn't look up, but her hands tensed. That night Jeremiah entered the tent with firm steps. Sarah looked at him, not knowing whether to thank, fear, or stay silent. He crouched beside the children, observed them quietly. One of them, Thomas, slept restlessly with fever. His breathing was short, labored. "He's burning," Sarah said, pointing to the child desperately. "He needs help. I don't know what to do." Jeremiah looked at her steadily. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He stood without saying anything. He left the tent. Hours passed. Thomas's fever worsened. Singing Crane did what she could, but the child didn't respond. Sarah cried silently, fearing to lose one of her children without even being able to name what afflicted him. She hugged all three, murmuring old prayers learned as a child, powerless prayers that barely grazed her cracked lips. At dawn, Jeremiah returned. His hair was damp with frost and his boots covered with mud. In his hands he carried a hide bag tied with cords. Without a word, he handed it to Singing Crane. The old woman opened it urgently. Inside were fresh roots, a handful of green leaves, and a reddish powder, rare ingredients difficult to find in that season. Sarah understood in that moment. He'd gone out in the dead of night just to find what his clan wouldn't give him. He'd done it for a child not his own, for the son of a foreign woman, her chest filled with something she couldn't explain. It wasn't gratitude. It was something else, deeper, more dangerous. During the following days, Thomas improved. The fever broke. Color returned to his cheeks. The other children laughed among the blankets, making soft sounds. Sarah began moving with more confidence, helping Singing Crane with the fire, washing her children's clothes with icy water. She watched attentively every gesture, every word, trying to understand. The settlement was small but alive. Men with painted faces, women with long braids, elders sitting by the fire, children running barefoot. All looked at her with suspicion. No one greeted her, but neither did they expel her for now. One afternoon she heard a conversation between two young trappers. One pointed toward her tent. Although they spoke in their mountain tongue, she understood the essential parts. They mentioned Texas traders, weapons exchange. One sketched a smile, the other nodded. Fear rose up her throat like poison. As night fell, Jeremiah found her standing outside the tent with the shawl covering her shoulders, the children sleeping inside. She looked at him with wide eyes, full of tears that wouldn't fall. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. "Please, I beg you." He didn't respond, but neither did he turn away. He observed her for a long time, as if seeking within her something he didn't yet understand. Then, without saying anything, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. That night, the wind again blew forcefully over the tents, but inside, beside the fire's warmth, Sarah knew it wasn't yet time to die. Though the ground beneath her feet was enemy territory, though the faces surrounding her didn't want her there was one thing they couldn't take from her: the will to protect her children. Even if she had to do it alone, even if the price was her own soul. The first snows had melted and the air began filling with the perfume of plants sleeping beneath the earth. The settlement recovered its usual movement, though tension still felt subtle, like a taut thread unseen but burning. Sarah felt it in how some women lowered their gaze when crossing paths with her, or in the murmurs that silenced just as she passed. No one touched her. No one insulted her, but contempt floated like smoke from campfires, invisible but present. Sarah, however, had learned to move in silence. Each morning she left with the shawl tight to her body, children held in her arms, and approached the creek to wash stained fabrics. Her fingers, still sensitive from cold, scrubbed garments with serene dignity. She didn't complain, didn't cry. While others worked together, she did so alone. And still, each of her movements was firm, precise. There was in her posture a strength that asked no permission, but didn't challenge either. From afar, Jeremiah watched her. It wasn't his intention to follow her with his eyes. It simply happened. His gaze sought her among trees, among tent bodies, among council murmurs. He saw her bend to collect firewood, nurse children by the fire, mend hems of her only skirt with improvised thread. There was no haughtiness in her, but there was an integrity that reminded him of aspens, tall, slender, always erect, though wind lashed them furiously. They didn't speak, barely crossed paths sometimes, and when they did, a slight gesture sufficed, an almost imperceptible nod. They needed no words. Between both began being born something nameless, something sliding under skin like an ancient murmur. One afternoon, while Sarah hung blankets on an improvised rope between two branches, she heard a dry whinny. She turned and saw him. Jeremiah caressed his horse's back, a robust animal with dark coat and white patch on its chest. The beast snorted while he checked its legs, murmuring something quietly with a sweetness contrasting his stone-carved face. Sarah looked at him without realizing. He raised his gaze. Their eyes met. She lowered hers immediately, heart beating strongly in her chest, but she didn't move, and neither did he. It was then a shadow descended over the settlement. Winter Hawk returned with the west wind. She arrived on horseback, dressed in a war tunic, adorned with black feathers and hand-carved beads. She was tall, with angular face and fierce gaze. Her steps were sure, and her presence impossible to ignore. She didn't need to speak. Her entrance alone made everyone understand something had changed. Winterhawk was daughter of one of the clan's most ancient chiefs and had been for years the chosen companion for Jeremiah. No one had said it in words, but it was a fact accepted by all. Her sudden disappearance during a hunt time ago left a difficult void to fill. Now she returned without warning, head high and pride intact. When her eyes settled on Sarah, there was no surprise, only cold recognition, as if she'd already heard everything necessary. She approached Jeremiah without hesitation. They spoke apart in low voices. Then she addressed the tribal council, and that same night she demanded with harsh words and firm tone that the white woman be expelled from the settlement. Sarah didn't understand the exact words, but the subsequent silence sufficed. No one looked at her. No one defended her. Only Jeremiah remained standing with arms crossed and gaze fixed on the flames. Tension grew during following days. Some men agreed with Winterhawk, though they didn't say so openly. Women, divided between loyalty and prudence, avoided Sarah more than ever. Children stopped approaching. Even Singing Crane, the healer, reduced her words to gestures. But Sarah didn't break. Each time she went to collect water, she did so with head high. Each time one of her children cried, she consoled him with ancient songs learned in childhood. Each time she felt the world rejecting her, she clung to the warmth of those small bodies she'd brought into the world, reminding herself she was still alive, still had something to protect. One morning, while collecting dry branches on the settlement's outskirts, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. She knew who it was. The aroma of dry leaves mixed with the intense perfume of plants Winterhawk used to braid her hair. The woman stopped a few steps away, and her voice, when she spoke, was like a dagger wrapped in silk. "No white woman will be accepted as equal," Winterhawk said. Sarah swallowed, didn't respond. "No matter how many times you look with humility, nor how many blankets you wash, as if you were one of us. You're not. You never will be." "I don't seek to be accepted," Sarah murmured without turning. "I only want my children to live." Winterhawk approached one more step. The breeze stirred her tunic. Sun descended slowly through branches, tinting air with copper tones. "It's not just about you. It's about him," she said harshly. "Jeremiah doesn't see clearly when you're near. You distract him, weaken him, and that puts us all in danger." Sarah pressed her lips. She also clenched her fists, containing something stirring in her chest like a furious river. She wouldn't allow herself to be hurt by words, but neither would she surrender her dignity in exchange for silence. "If I distract him, that's his matter, not mine," she responded with firm voice. Winterhawk looked at her for a long time, then turned on her heels and walked away, leaving behind a trail of resentment and threat. That night, while feeding her children by the fire, Sarah couldn't help raising her gaze. Jeremiah was nearby talking with an elder. When he felt her gaze, he slowly turned his face toward her. It was just an instant, a fleeting crossing of glances. But in that brief encounter, Sarah felt something she'd never felt before, that she wasn't alone. That man, so distant and quiet, had crossed an invisible line by walking toward her in the middle of snow. And though he didn't know it, though he wouldn't admit it yet, each step he took since then was marked by the echo of that decision. Murmurs grew around her like wild grass, but under her skin something new also bloomed. And that night, tucking in her children and closing her eyes, Sarah understood she'd entered a silent war. A war without weapons, a war of glances, whispers, hearts beating louder than they dared say. Night had fallen over the settlement with dense thickness, as if sky had decided to keep its stars silent. Campfires burned among tents, casting flickering shadows over bodies moving in circles, some around fire, others around a woman's destiny who didn't understand the words hanging over her head. Sarah remained seated beside Singing Crane, with tight heart and eyes fixed on figures arguing across the clearing. She didn't understand what they said, but she understood the tone. Each phrase launched by Winterhawk was an invisible lance. Each reply from Jeremiah, a shield asking no glory but resisting firmly. She'd learned in the short time she'd been there to read silences, to hear what wasn't said, evasive glances, crossed arms, muffled whispers when she passed with children in arms. Now those same eyes burned with mixture of judgment and distrust. Only Jeremiah remained standing, firm, without looking away from those surrounding him. Sarah didn't know what he'd said in her defense. She only felt in wind's murmur that her permanence there hung by a thread. If that thread cut, There would be no forgiveness, no home, no tomorrow for her children. When discussion ended, Singing Crane rose and touched her lightly on the shoulder. It was a gesture as light as a caress. The old woman said nothing, but Sarah knew that for that night she'd continue breathing beside her little ones. The council dispersed slowly. Some men walked away without looking back. Winterhawk remained a few moments longer, watching her from afar. Then she turned with the rigidity of one promising wordless revenge. The air she left behind tasted of ash. The next morning, the settlement awoke with usual routine. Life didn't stop for one woman's destiny, though that woman felt the ground beneath her feet had become more fragile. Sarah left early to seek water. The creek's flow was thin, but sufficient. She knelt and washed her face with trembling hands. Cold chilled her to the bone, but forced her to feel she was still there, still alive. During that day something began to change. Small gestures, barely perceptible. An old woman offered her a bowl of corn without looking in her eyes. A child dropped his rag ball near her and didn't flee when picking it up. Singing Crane, while preparing her herb mixture, murmured a word in her language and repeated it twice, touching her chest. Heart, Sarah supposed. Maybe love. It didn't matter. The intention was clear, to teach. Following days were same and different. Singing Crane began pointing objects with her finger, naming them slowly. Then she pointed the same object in Sarah's hands. A stone, a bowl, a blanket, a dried flower. Each new word engraved in her mind with precision of prayer. Singing Crane also taught her lullabies, soft and rhythmic, which she repeated while braiding her hair or sewing new blankets for the little ones. Sounds were difficult at first, but Sarah repeated with determination even when mistaken. Learning was her only weapon. As days passed, she sewed blankets beside others, though silently. She learned to recognize gestures of disapproval, but also those of discreet acceptance. A slight nod, a gaze no longer averting with contempt. Her children were her refuge. Seeing them sleep, seeing them smile among wool folds, gave her strength. Mary's crying, Benjamin's sigh, Thomas's yawn were rhythms of her soul. One night, after an especially exhausting day, Sarah returned alone to the clearing where dry branches were stored for campfires. She carried with her a small linen bag she'd preserved against her chest since her flight. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was her mother's medal, a silver Virgen del Carmen, worn by time with blurred letters and surface scratched by roadstones. She contemplated it long under moon's weak light. She thought of her mother, her childhood, the hacienda's altar where each Sunday she knelt obediently, of the woman she'd been before fire, before cold, before crossing the threshold of a world that rejected and transformed her simultaneously. She dug a small hole among stones under the nearest tree. She placed the medal there delicately. She didn't cry, only whispered, "Nothing I was belongs to me anymore." She covered the medal with earth and branches. Upon rising, she saw she wasn't alone. A few steps away, Jeremiah watched her silently. There was no noise in his footsteps, only night breeze and slight creak of leaves. Sarah looked at him with open eyes, but without startle. He didn't approach, didn't ask either, only slowly raised a hand and took from his belt a small object wrapped in hide. He offered it wordlessly. She extended her hands. It was a knife, not large, not for war, but well sharpened, with handle adorned by small dark bead knots. Sarah held it without understanding. "For you," he said in broken English. She frowned. "Why?" Jeremiah lowered his gaze slightly, as if the weight of response didn't fit in his tongue. Then he raised his eyes and said quietly, "If someone touches—" He said no more. It wasn't necessary. Sarah nodded, closed her fingers over the handle gently. Metal was cold, but something warm ignited in her chest. It wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper, something remaining even when the gesture had ended. That night, lying beside her children, Sarah kept the knife under the blanket. Not from fear, but because something in her needed to remember she was no longer just a survivor. She'd taken another step. She'd drawn a line. An invisible bond began weaving between her world and that of that silent man, who promised nothing but offered acts braver than any oath. Outside, night sighed over the settlement. Stars, hidden behind cloud veil, seemed to listen to what no one said. Sarah closed her eyes. For the first time since her arrival, sleep came without fear, and on her lips a name she didn't dare pronounce aloud, but which already lived in her chest like a soft and tenacious root. Heat slowly returned to earth, as if winter gave its last breath in an indecisive sigh. Branches began covering with timid shoots, and streams, once sleeping under frost, murmured again among stones. The settlement smelled of sweet smoke, cooked roots, leather drying in sun. Life readjusted in its routine. That day brought no signs of danger, but Sarah felt a chill when sentinel murmurs broke calm. The word stranger repeated from tent to tent. Men with bows on backs and spears in hand approached with stealthy steps to the central clearing, where a solitary rider waited under suspicious gaze of warriors. He came mounted on a pale horse, covered with dust. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a worn frock coat, and a white bandana tied at his neck. He had grown beard and boots worn by desert miles, but he wasn't a defeated man. His smile, tense, controlled, betrayed the cunning of one who knows to measure words before pronouncing them. "My name is Marcus Galindo," he announced in English. "I'm a deserter from the Union Army. I come in peace, I carry no weapons, only seek refuge for a few days and food if there is any." Jeremiah, standing among his people, didn't respond immediately. He looked at him with same hardness used to observe a wounded animal that could still bite. The stranger dismounted slowly, without looking away from the chief. He raised both hands in sign of calm. His white bandana barely waved with breeze. Sarah, from her tense shadow, saw him, and time stopped. That man wasn't called Marcus Galindo. He was called Edmund Whitfield. Heart struck her chest forcefully. That dust-covered face, measured gestures, tangled hair. It was him, the same who'd courted her sister Clara for years, the same who spoke charmingly at hacienda gatherings and wrote poems on perfumed papers, the same who, after being rejected by Clara, had disappeared overnight and now reappeared there before her with another name and another disguise. Sarah slowly retreated with pale face and shrunken stomach. She mustn't reveal herself. She mustn't show she knew him, not in front of everyone. Jeremiah allowed him to stay one night under watch. The stranger was guided by White Wolf, the veteran warrior, to an empty tent beside settlement's edge. He wasn't permitted to touch weapons or leave without escort. Edmund or Marcus accepted with affable smile, as if that treatment were courtesy more than precaution. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by fire with children huddled in blankets, listening to every exterior sound. Singing Crane, noticing her unrest, asked with her gaze. Sarah only gently declined. She couldn't explain it. Not yet. At dawn, Edmund began winning some people's sympathy. He spoke fluently, told stories of battles and betrayals, marches through desert and nights under stars. He mentioned commander names, dates, places. Sometimes he touched a small engraved knife with symbols, a gift, he said, from a northern chief. Some listened with skepticism, others with curiosity. It was on the third day when he crossed paths with Sarah alone. She carried Mary in arms, singing one of the songs Singing Crane had taught her, when she saw him standing before the watering place. Upon turning, their eyes met. Edmund removed his hat with calculated slowness. He smiled. Sarah stopped, petrified. "How small the earth is," he said quietly, approaching a step. "I never would have imagined finding you here, so changed." "Don't call me," she murmured without raising her gaze. "Don't worry," he responded. "I won't say your name. Not yet." She looked at him then with mixture of fear and contained rage. "What do you want?" "That depends on you," he said, tilting his head. "I've seen many things and learned that in wartime, information is worth more than gold. Some would pay very well to know that the youngest Whitmore daughter didn't die in the massacre, but lives here among mountain men, raising half-breeds." Sarah felt the world narrowing around her. "They're my children. I won't allow—" "Won't allow what?" he interrupted softly. "That they sell them, separate them from you? You can't protect them, Sarah. This place is fragile, and you even more so." She looked at him furiously but said nothing. "If you cooperate, I stay quiet. If not, we'll see," he concluded, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Sarah returned to her tent with numb legs. She pressed her children against her chest. Fear wasn't new, but it was sharper, more real. Jeremiah watched her from afar. He'd noticed something in her gaze since the stranger's arrival, a barely visible tremor, sudden distance. That same night he approached her tent when moon already hung over mountains. She saw him coming. She didn't light the lamp. Exterior fire sufficed to outline his figure. He sat a few steps away in silence. He looked at her long, as if waiting for her to speak, but Sarah kept silent. "That man doesn't tell the truth," Jeremiah stated quietly. She lowered her gaze. She couldn't lie to him, but neither could she risk her children. "I know," she finally whispered, "but I can't say more. Not yet." Jeremiah nodded. He didn't ask, only stood and walked away with slow steps. That night, Edmund wrote with crude ink in a small leather notebook. He did it hidden under blanket with a pen he'd kept among his clothes. He noted names, descriptions, settlement movements. He also wrote, "The white woman isn't just anyone. Her name is Sarah Whitmore, sister of Clara, they say widowed, lives under the chief's protection, has 3 half-breed children, can be used as exchange currency." He closed the notebook and stored it in his boot. Outside, wind struck tents with sharp whistle. Inside, danger grew invisible, fed by past shadows. And Sarah, sitting by fire, knew the destiny she'd built with so much pain could crumble at any moment, with just one cursed word, with just one revealed secret. But she also knew she didn't intend to surrender. Not again. Not while she had breath in her chest. Not while her children breathed. Hot wind descended from hills with dry rumor, as if dragging secrets among brush. Air no longer smelled of firewood or humidity, but of dust and warning. In the settlement, faces began hardening again, as if invisible tremor shook foundations of that fragile truce Sarah had begun building with trembling but determined hands. Edmund moved among tents with practiced man's skill. He knew when to smile, when to offer help lifting heavy loads, when to keep silent with respectful expression. He spoke little, but just right. He presented himself as grateful, as a man without country or weapons. But each gesture had arrow's precision disguised as feather. Some young mountain men began listening to him. He laughed with them by fire. He shared tales of distant battles, soldiers sleeping with open eyes and generals betraying for gold. He related how he'd deserted for principles, not cowardice. He said governments changed like seasons, but a man's value measured in his word. Some believed him, others pretended to. Winterhawk watched him carefully. She didn't trust him fully, but did trust his usefulness. Contempt toward Sarah had grown since her return, and now she found in Edmund a convenient instrument. She asked no questions, enough to let him speak. Rumors began circulating subtly, first on a young woman's lips who claimed seeing Sarah speak alone among stones. Then, in evasive gaze of mother, who noticed one of triplets fell ill just after crossing her shadow. Later, an elder whispered it wasn't natural for white women to survive so long in foreign land without giving something in exchange. "She's a witch," one said. "She and her children bring bad air." Jeremiah listened without intervening, but his eyes said everything. His people began dividing, and that fissure grew like echo among tents. Sarah felt it. Each step in settlement became heavier, gazes colder, words scarcer. Some women avoided their children approaching hers. Food arrived late or in smaller portions. Even Singing Crane, always firm but constant, showed more silent, as if protecting something she couldn't name. But she didn't surrender. She never did. One dawn, son of one of Clan's most respected weavers began convulsing. His mother, desperate, screamed for help. Men slept. No one came. It was Sarah who ran to the tent. She entered, uncalled. The child trembled, his body covered in cold sweat, eyes rolled back. "He can't breathe," the mother murmured, crying. "He's going to die." Sarah knelt beside him. She remembered an infusion Singing Crane had taught her weeks back, made with bitter roots and steam. She ran out without waiting permission. She returned with clay vessel where mixture boiled. She moistened cloths. She placed them on child's chest, wrapped him in blankets, and while blowing steam toward his face, whispered a lullaby in language she barely mastered, but repeated with soul. Hours later, child breathed slowly. His eyelids trembled but no longer agitated. He slept alive. News spread like fire over dry leaves. No one understood how, but Sarah had saved son of one of theirs. The weaver spoke no words of gratitude, but that same night placed small thread bracelet beside entrance of tent where Sarah slept. It was a gesture, symbol, beginning. Next day, an old woman approached her cautiously. "Sister," she said, touching her arm delicately. Sarah didn't know what to respond, but tears burning in her eyes said more than any word. Jeremiah witnessed everything. From distance, he watched woman who time ago arrived broken in his arms. Now she walked with dignity that made many uncomfortable. There was something in her indefinable. It wasn't just strength. It was beauty without pretension, courage without arrogance, a woman marked by pain but not defeated by it. He looked at her each time with less distance. Her presence unsettled him, not from weakness, as Winterhawk had said, but from certainty that this woman could overturn his convictions without saying a single word. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Air was thick. She felt something gestating in shadow. She took children and covered them with more blankets. She left tent carefully without making noise. She walked among extinguished campfires. Embers still glowed under ash. It was then she saw him. Edmund, leaning against a trunk, wrote in small black leather notebook. His face was illuminated by tiny flames trembling light. He moved hand rapidly, as if each line were urgent. Occasionally he looked around, then returned to writing. Sarah remained motionless, heart pounding in chest. He didn't see her. She returned to tent without being discovered. She sat by fire, closed eyes, and knew that man hadn't come seeking refuge. He'd come to destroy. Calm that had cost so much to build hung by thread, and she was not rope and weight. Sky began tinting lighter blue when Jeremiah stopped before tent where Sarah slept. He said no word, only remained there erect, arms crossed, eyes fixed on hide entrance. Settlement still slept. First embers revived under ashes, and birds barely dared break silence. Everything seemed suspended in that uncertain instant between night and day. Sarah emerged with one child in arms. Her eyes still carried sleep weight, but seeing him there, so firm and silent, she understood something had been decided. "Come," he said in his rough but clear English. She didn't ask where, didn't request explanations, only nodded. She gathered some blankets, children's diapers, and bag with dried bread. Singing Crane handed her without word an infusion wrapped in thick cloth. White Wolf watched them depart from shadow without intervening. No one else moved. They mounted horse before sun touched hills. Jeremiah helped her up, arranged children among well-secured blankets, and took northern route. They rode silently for several hours. Air was still cool, but sky announced heat would soon seize the day. Landscape changed little by little. From brush-covered plains they passed to narrow canyons, paths bordered by oaks and grey rocks. As they advanced, world sounds seemed to distance. No longer heard tent rumor, nor other horses' trot, nor distant conversation murmur. Only remained sound of hooves striking earth, wind sliding among branches, and Mary's soft crying as she dozed in her mother's arms. They reached valley, when sun was already high. It was hidden place among hills, sheltered by ancient trees and ravine where crystal water thread ran. Wildflowers speckled path edges, and butterflies fluttered in silent dance over hot stones. Place seemed untouched, ancient, alien to time. Sarah dismounted slowly. Jeremiah helped arrange children under tree shade. Then he walked away a few steps, gathered firewood, and lit fire. He did everything with tranquil efficiency, without hurry, as if each gesture had interior rhythm independent of world. Sarah sat on ground with back against trunk. Children slept. She looked at them long while, then raised gaze toward him. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked quietly. Jeremiah didn't respond immediately. He walked to ravine, collected water in clay vessel, and returned. He sat facing her, crossing legs solemnly. Only then did he speak. "This place was ours." Sarah frowned slightly. "Ours, hers, and mine," he clarified, lowering gaze. "Morning Star." Her name remained suspended in air. His voice didn't tremble, but his eyes darkened, as if shadow enveloped them from within. "She was my wife. The first," he continued. "We lived in highlands. She was laughter, was song. She sang with hawks when they flew over valley." Sarah didn't dare move. His voice tone was low, grave, like drum resonating in earth's entrails. One day cavalry soldiers came. Said they needed lands, water, passage. Said they wanted to talk. They entered with white flags and left with fire. Morning Star died in my arms. Our daughter hadn't yet opened eyes. They took her too. Silence that followed was long, more than any word. A bird crossed sky and its shadow passed over both without either raising gaze. "Since then they call me Iron Bear," he said bitterly. "For blood, for scar. But that's not my name." Sarah looked at him without blinking. "And what do you call yourself?" Jeremiah lowered eyes as if saying his true name implied breaking vow he'd kept for years. "Nathaniel." he whispered. He who hears the wind. She repeated name in mind, like one guarding secret jewel among soul's folds. Nathaniel, she said quietly, testing its sound. He raised gaze. Their looks met. For first time, without barriers, without different tongues, without duty's weight, just them. Two wounded souls, two survivors. Fire between them crackled slowly, like heart beating with effort. Sarah approached barely, not with intention to console but to understand. She sat facing him at intimate but prudent distance. Sun began descending behind hills. Wind slipped among branches, and with it came distant song. A hawk soared sky. She pointed with trembling hand. Do you believe she still sings with them? Nathaniel nodded gently. Yes. When wind brings that sound, it's her. Sarah felt eyes moisten, not from pity, but from painful beauty of that memory, from way he spoke of lost love with dignity of one who hadn't buried it, but transformed it. Tears flowed without permission. She didn't try to stop them. Nathaniel extended hand, didn't touch her face, didn't embrace her, only grazed her blanket's edge, barely visible gesture, but one that made her tremble. Sarah closed eyes. That hand's touch sufficed to ignite her skin, not with carnal desire, but with contained tenderness that hurt more than any caress. Night fell over them like thick blanket. Children slept wrapped in warmth. Fire illuminated their faces with soft shadows. Nathaniel looked at her. Sarah held his gaze. They didn't know who leaned first, only that their lips met slowly. It was unhurried kiss, without urgency, quiet encounter between two bodies marked by loss. They didn't cling, didn't devour each other. It was moist touch, trembling, as if both feared and needed each other simultaneously. They separated slowly, didn't speak. Silence was their refuge. Nathaniel looked away. Sarah imitated him. Both knew what had been born between them was more powerful than flesh, but also more dangerous. That night they slept close, but not together. Fire consumed slowly, and among branch crackle, water murmur, and hawk's distant song floated something nameless. Invisible bond, revealed name, shared wound, and promise neither dared pronounce, but from that moment lived in both their blood. Return to settlement was silent. Afternoon air carried different scent, mixture of smoke, ash, and wet brush. Season had changed without warning. Spring, though warm, brought no comfort. That hidden valley that had served as refuge now seemed distant, almost unreal, like too brief dream that life insisted on erasing quickly. Nathaniel and Sarah crossed last hill as sun fell. From height they could see tents still standing, but something in settlement's arrangement didn't fit. Movement was missing, music was missing. Life that used to sprout among paths seemed replaced by contained tension, by leaf whisper that didn't belong to wind. White Wolf received them wordlessly. His face expression sufficed. He left, he said, looking at Nathaniel gravely. At dawn he took horse without permission. He was heading south. Nathaniel frowned. Sarah didn't need them to say the name. Her stomach contracted as if invisible fist had squeezed her heart. Did he carry anything else? The chief asked. Nothing we saw, but they saw him speak with 3 men in Canyon. Texas uniforms, White Wolf added, lowering voice. Sarah felt world closing on her. Her breathing became short, uneven. Nathaniel fixed eyes on horizon, then lowered them toward her. He asked no questions, offered no explanations either. Hours later, council gathered around major fire. Men of all ages spoke, discussed, raised voices. Some demanded fleeing north, others preparing for war. Elders kept silence, as if time had taught them no word wiser than one kept quiet. Sarah remained aside, sitting on stone with Mary sleeping in lap and twins, lying on blanket near her feet. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, only listened. But within her an idea germinated forcefully, certainty as clear as knife's edge. Later, when sky tinted dark blue and stars began appearing timidly, Sarah approached Singing Crane. She knelt before her and took her hands respectfully. Old Woman looked at her with deep eyes and understood without need for words. "Care for them," Sarah said in rudimentary mountain tongue. "Just little time." Singing Crane didn't respond, but nodded. She called one of younger women and indicated she'd bring warm milk and new blankets. Then she leaned over children and murmured ancestral blessing, soft song that seemed to wrap them in invisible protection net. Sarah kissed each one. Her touch was light, almost ethereal. She didn't want to wake them. didn't want them to see her leave. She took her shawl, tied knife Nathaniel had given her to belt, and left silently. Her steps were firm, legs more sure than ever. Fear was still there, but beneath it was something more powerful, Mother's determination. She hadn't advanced much when she heard footsteps behind. She stopped without turning. "You can't go alone," Nathaniel's voice said behind her. Sarah turned slowly. Her eyes, illuminated by moon, didn't tremble. "I've done it before. Now it's different." "Yes," she responded. "Now I know what I have to do." Nathaniel approached one more step. His face was tense, contained. Wind stirred his cloak, and his silhouette seemed to merge with mountain darkness. "You don't understand what he can cause," he said harshly. "Yes, I understand more than you. If I don't stop him, all this, everything we achieved, will crumble." "You mustn't risk yourself," he replied quietly. It was then Sarah took step toward him. Her eyes burned. "I'm not Burden, I'm Mother," she shouted, and her voice broke night's calm like stone thrown to water. "You can have weapons, men, and strategies. I have something else. I know how he moves, I know how he thinks, and above all, I know what's at stake here." Nathaniel said nothing. His gaze was contained fire. His chest rose with dense breathing, as if her words had shattered something he believed immutable. "I don't come asking permission," Sarah added, lower, firmer. "I come to do what no one else can." She turned without waiting response. With each step, ground crunched under her feet. Night closed around her, but she walked as if carrying light within. Behind her, Nathaniel remained motionless. He'd known war, betrayal, loss, but never had felt what now burned in his chest, mixture of respect and fear. Because that woman, who'd arrived at his world covered with frost and silence, now walked toward storm with dignity that couldn't be stopped. Winter had passed, but its shadow still hung over them, and it wouldn't forgive whoever dared look elsewhere. While Sarah lost herself among trees, wind blew forcefully like omen, and though settlement remained calm, something in Earth's depths began to creak. Dawn peeked timidly among low clouds covering Sierras. Sky had ashen tone, and air announced snow. Though it was spring, in those highlands winter seemed to resist dying. Frost again covered stone edges, and wind, cold and dry, bit skin without mercy. Sarah advanced with firm step, though each muscle in her body begged rest. Fatigue was constant echo in her back, but didn't stop her. She followed barely marked tracks in damp earth, traces of horse penetrating little-traveled paths. She knew how to read them, had learned watching Nathaniel, remembering explorer movements, silent signs that spoke more than words. She pressed shawl over chest. She carried knife well tied to waist, hidden among skirt folds. In her chest, determination grew with each step. It wasn't rage that drove her. It was something denser, urgency made of love and fear, pride and promise. If Edmund had delivered Valley's location, if his betrayal was already in motion, there was still chance to stop him, before he destroyed what had cost so much to build. She crossed rocky slope and reached plain where wind blew with greater force. There, amid fog, she spotted crevice among rocks, cave hidden by brush and dry moss. Something inside seemed to breathe, tense, contained quietude. Sarah approached without making noise, pushed aside branches and entered. Cave smelled of extinguished smoke and wet leather. At back, weak glow indicated fire, and beside it, Edmund sat with back against wall, writing in his notebook. Same notebook she'd seen so many nights hidden among shadows. He wore hat on ground and thick brown coat. Hearing footsteps, he raised gaze. His expression wasn't surprise, but something murkier, satisfaction. "I knew you'd come," he said calmly. Sarah stopped few steps away without lowering gaze. "You have no escape, Edmund. Return what you stole." He laughed, dry laugh, without joy. "You think this is about stealing? This is survival, Sarah. Here no one gives anything away, neither you nor that savage who protects you." "Don't speak of him," she replied coldly. "Speak of yourself. You delivered Valley's location. You're signing death sentence for everyone." Edmund stood slowly. His face, aged by betrayal, had new lines of bitterness. With each step he took, Sarah remained firm, though inside fear pang ran down her spine. "You always so brave," he said mockingly. "But tell me, what do you think will happen when soldiers arrive? You think yours will save you? You think those children can hide? They won't, because you taught them to trust." She pressed lips, took defensive step back. I won't let you touch anyone else, neither my children nor my people. Edmund looked at her, and something dark crossed his eyes. It was then his mask fell. He lunged at her quickly. Sarah defended with nails, with body, with instinct of one who'd crossed hell and didn't plan to fall without fight. They rolled on frozen ground. Edmund tried to grab her wrists, but Sarah bit his arm. They struggled among stones and dry branches. In violent movement, he took loose stone and struck her side. Pain was immediate, sharp, as if something inside her broke. She fell sideways, with blurred vision. Blood rose to chest with irregular rhythm. Cave spun. Edmund approached with stone still in hand, but didn't get to give second blow. A dry sound filled space. Sharp whistle, like buzz cutting air. Then silence. Sarah blinked. Edmund stood, but motionless. Stone fell from his hand. Slowly he brought fingers to chest. There in center, red stain drew itself. He staggered, fell to knees, then sideways. At cave entrance, Nathaniel watched him with bow still tense. His face was stone, his gaze shadow. He entered with firm steps, letting falling snow melt in his hair and cloak. He knelt beside Sarah. He took her in arms with delicacy of one holding most fragile thing. She could barely speak. "I told you," she whispered with muffled voice. "Shh," he said in his language. "You won't be alone again." He held her against his chest. His breath was warm, his arm firm. Snowflakes began entering through cave opening, floating among bodies and settling on blood still expanding under Edmund's corpse. Aside, leather notebook had remained half open, stained with blood. Nathaniel picked it up, observed it carefully. He didn't open it, stored it among his clothes. Sarah closed eyes, letting pain dissolve little by little. Nathaniel's heartbeat under her ear was only thing reminding her she was still alive. That despite cold, blood and death, her heart kept seeking something more than justice. It sought home, and perhaps for first time, didn't feel it so far away. Smoke still floated on horizon when 1st Texas Patrol crossed settlement limits. They went in closed formation, well-fed horses, rifles on shoulders, eyes trained not to miss detail. But they found no resistance. There were no shots or screams, neither bodies nor signs of struggle. Only diffuse tracks, fresh ashes, and thick silence speaking of silent, premeditated retreat, too clean to be casual. Hundreds of meters away, hidden among cliffs, Nathaniel watched with narrowed eyes. Beside him, Sarah protected children from icy wind with her body. Little ones slept exhausted. At canyon bottom, other clan members waited silently, bows ready if enemy decided to explore further. It wasn't necessary. Finding nothing they sought, soldiers dispersed. Some rode down opposite side of valley, others penetrated brush, leaving behind them light traces of their presence. They didn't know they were being watched. They didn't know their steps had been foreseen. Nathaniel gave march order. They had to continue. It wasn't safe to return yet. Decision was made. He'd take his people, and especially her, to higher lands, where mountains grazed clouds and days were cold even in summer. There lived small group of distant relatives, men and women who'd withdrawn from world after last great massacre. They weren't many, but sufficed. During March, landscape became more rugged. Air gained altitude and vegetation changed color. Insect sound was replaced by bird song that only lived at those heights. Wind was finer, more piercing, but calm that environment offered compensated effort. Nathaniel walked at front, attentive to every sound, every shadow. Sarah went few steps behind with one child in arms, and others sleeping in bundles she carried on back. She didn't complain, didn't ask help. She'd learned to measure her breath and save strength for when most needed. One afternoon, when sun descended slowly among peaks and group stopped beside stream to drink and light fire, Nathaniel sat beside her. For first time in days, silence wasn't obligation, but opportunity. Sarah looked at him sideways. He was covered with dust, skin tanned by sun, dark braids falling over shoulders. In his eyes was no hardness, only deep, human, contained fatigue. "You should have left me," she said suddenly. "When you found me that day in snow, I could have died. Perhaps it was just." Nathaniel looked at her without responding immediately. He seemed to seek words in language not made to speak of emotions. "Dying is easy," he said finally. "Difficult is living with what hurts." Sarah lowered gaze. Stream sound filled spaces between their phrases. Afternoon's golden light painted stone edges, making world seem less cruel, at least for a moment. I wasn't living either, she confessed. I had husband, surname, house, but I had no peace or love. He was hard man. He took me as if I were another hacienda object. Didn't matter if it hurt, if I bled, only that I obeyed. Nathaniel clenched jaws. His body didn't move, but in his gaze, silent fury spark ignited. I got pregnant by him, she continued, voice low but firm. I thought having children would change something, that perhaps he'd look at me differently, but it was worse. He became crueler, more violent. When children were born, he no longer spoke to me, only commanded. She stopped, breathed deeply, then looked at him bravely. I'm not weak for having endured it, but neither am I guilty for having escaped. Nathaniel leaned toward her without touching her. You're stronger than any warrior I've known, he said with grave voice. Sarah's heart trembled, not from flattery, but from truth it carried. Nathaniel wasn't man of unnecessary words. Each phrase was declaration, vow. They kept silence for minutes. Fire sparked between them. Children slept in corner wrapped in wool blankets. A branch crackled among embers. In distance, owl sang its first note. Then Nathaniel took from his pack small object wrapped in leather. He handed it carefully. Sarah looked at it and recognized it instantly. It was Edmund's notebook. She held it without opening. I can't yet, she said quietly. When you're ready, he responded. She stored it among her things, not from fear, but because she knew opening those pages would be like looking straight into abyss, and she didn't yet have strength not to fall. That night, improvised camp rested in hollow, protected by tall trees. Sky was clean, and stars seemed closer than ever. Sarah woke once in middle of night and saw Nathaniel wasn't sleeping. He stood by fire looking at horizon. She didn't approach, made no noise, only watched him from distance. In her chest, something whispered that man also carried his own battles within, that his silences spoke of wounds that didn't bleed but didn't stop hurting. When she closed eyes again, she felt less alone. For first time in long time, she thought perhaps life offered her something more than surviving. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was also beginning to live. Low clouds dissolved at summit like breath on cold glass. Air had that sweet, dry scent of heights, where sky seems closer and silence has weight of generations that walked those paths before. High in mountains, far from dust, soldiers' thunder and valley rumors, Sarah and her children finally found respite. Many moons had passed since arriving at Nathaniel's allies' camp, almost secret refuge among irregular cliffs, old trees, and river of icy waters that never dried. There time seemed to move differently. Voices were few, steps measured, decisions slow. Life was hard, yes, but silent. No permission asked, no forgiveness either, only respect. Children, now stronger, walked clumsily among stones. Thomas was most curious, always touching insects or throwing pebbles to river. Benjamin, in contrast, was quieter, sought refuge near fire and observed. Mary, youngest, followed her brothers like cheerful shadow, babbling words mixed between English and mountain tongue. Their bare feet didn't fear ground, and her laughter, when it burst, extended like caress over peaks. That day at dawn, sky tinted red, deep, thick red, as if sun had bled over clouds. Clan elders, gathered before major fire, watched silently. One raised stick adorned with eagle feathers. No one spoke, but all knew how to read sign. In that land, red sun wasn't death omen, but transformation, something that must begin anew. Nathaniel, from summit, contemplated horizon. He had no words to describe what he felt, but his chest expanded with calm he hadn't known since youth. There was something in that sun, in that woman, in those half-breed children who laughed fearlessly, that reminded him not everything lost was destined to disappear. Some things returned in other form, other time. He descended toward tent he shared with Sarah. He saw her from behind, combing Mary patiently, speaking in mountain tongue, teaching animal names. Child repeated each word clumsily but enthusiastically. Nathaniel didn't interrupt, only observed. Sarah's voice tone had something different, no longer doubt. It was belonging. That language that months ago was alien now flowed from her mouth naturally, as if it had always been there. "Good day," he said when Sarah noticed his presence. "Good day, Nathaniel," she responded without stopping combing Child. He sat near, took Benjamin in arms, lifted him easily, and gave him nickname in his language, Little Wolf, he who watches from shadows. Then he embraced Thomas and called him Laughing Bear, he who brings joy. To Mary he said, Bright Star, she who brings light. Sarah listened with tight heart. She knew those names were more than game. They were way Nathaniel claimed them as his, not with laws or words, but with soul. Mid-morning, while collecting water by river, young man ran from cliff path. His clothes were covered with dust and feet bare. He announced strangers' arrival. Settlement altered. Warriors gathered. Nathaniel gave order to observe, not attack. Sarah, with children safe beside Singing Crane, walked to path limit. There she saw her, Winter Hawk. She came on foot, leaning on wooden staff. Her clothes were torn, face covered with earth. She had deep cut on right leg and walk was clumsy, unbalanced, but her gaze remained haughty, as if still refusing to fall completely. When she reached Nathaniel, she didn't say his name, didn't demand, didn't accuse, only bowed slightly and murmured, I ask refuge. Nathaniel didn't respond, only nodded and stepped aside. Winterhawk staggered, and it was Sarah who ran to hold her before falling. She led her to empty tent, cleaned wound without asking anything, offered water, changed bandages. Winterhawk didn't speak. Her silence was no longer arrogant. It was something else, humility that hurt. For days, Sarah tended her carefully. She didn't seek to please or redeem herself. She did it because necessary, because she understood pain, because she knew even proud ones bleed. One night, while moon shone high over camp, Winter Hawk spoke finally. He told me he'd wait for me, that he'd take me with him, she whispered without looking at Sarah, that together we'd have our own land, that he'd teach me to command, to be strong in white man's world. Sarah didn't respond. She knew whom she referred to. But he left me. When soldiers came, he pushed me to ravine and fled. Didn't even look back. Winter Hawk's voice broke for first time. You believed him? She continued. I did too, but you knew when to stop. I didn't. Sarah took her hand without squeezing. It wasn't weakness, she said gently. It was pain. And sometimes, when one bleeds inside long time, clings to anything not to die. Winter Hawk closed eyes. Tears rolled silently, asked no permission, needed no witnesses. Days later, when she walked more firmly, Winter Hawk went out to receive sun. Nathaniel saw her from afar. He didn't approach, but in his eyes was no rancor, only serene melancholy, what's felt for what once could have been and wasn't. That night, before fire, Sarah sat beside him. They didn't speak of Winter Hawk, didn't speak of anything, only looked at each other. In ember crackle, in their shoulders touch under blankets, they said everything they didn't yet know how to pronounce. Sun next day tinted red again, this time without omen, only as witness of pain and new life being born among its ashes. Days at summit had become longer. Wind no longer descended with ice daggers, but still blew with grave tone, seeming to warn peace was always truce. In camp, men repaired arrows, reinforced tents, and women cured roots hanging under eaves like ancient amulets. Children, more secure in steps, began climbing rocks, laughing aloud, playing fearlessly. But sky, though clear, wasn't free of signs. Nathaniel knew before messenger crossed Eagle Pass. He felt it in air's slight tremor, in way animals quieted, in dogs' restless eyes. Boy arrived exhausted, legs full of dust, face burned by sun. He carried leather bag tied to chest. Inside came letters. Nathaniel held them with same caution used to hold sleeping serpent. There were 4. Yellowed envelopes marked with Confederate Detachment seal operating south of Colorado River. Letters were Edmund's, recognizable careful handwriting, long strokes, as if each lie had been written with care. Letters spoke of white woman, Sarah Whitmore, who'd betrayed her people, said she'd abandoned home by own will, collaborated with mountain men, taught children their language and customs, knew clan movements, slept under same roof as chief enemy of Southern Army. A traitor, concluded officer in letter accompanying reports. If you wish to avoid armed incursion, deliver her in 4 days. Nathaniel read silently, then left tent with papers in hand and heart made knot. That night chief council was convoked in central esplanade. Men came from other bands, hidden villages among canyons. People scattered after wars. Some bore face scars, others eyes full of mourning. All new decision taken in that circle would change more than one destiny. Sarah waited aside, standing without saying word. She knew what letters said. She knew eyes looking at her now were different, colder, harder. They pointed at her not with voice, but with distance. Even women once close greeted her with brief, uncertain gesture. Nathaniel took word when fire burned at highest point. He spoke in his language firmly. He explained what was in documents, what accusations implied, then fell silent. One by one, chiefs gave opinions. Some suggested delivering woman and marching, others preparing for war. Few, oldest, doubted quietly, as if past's echo still whispered warnings in ear. Sarah stepped forward. Voice didn't tremble. "I don't want to be cause of more death," she said in her learned mountain speech with effort. "If delivering me avoids war, I'll do it." Silence was absolute. Singing crane lowered head. Winterhawk closed eyes. Children slept oblivious to everything. Nathaniel stepped toward her. His shadow projected over earth like promise. He looked at her intensely. There was no anger in eyes, no sorrow, only truth needing to be said. "You're not currency," he declared. "You're not delivery object. You're part of fire. You're of the living." No one replied. Some lowered gaze, others nodded without speaking. That same night, in tent distant from circle, Nathaniel convoked closest leaders. He spread on ground rudimentary map carved in hide. He showed routes, hidden passes, canyons usable as traps. He traced strategy to resist without fighting, to disorient, to divide. If enemy wanted war, it wouldn't be in open field. It would be in fog, among rocks, where they couldn't advance. Sarah wasn't present, but felt it. From tent, she could hear decision murmurs. She prepared infusion with firm hands, changed children's diapers, and lit candle before entrance, not as rite, as vigil. Hours later, when council fire extinguished, Nathaniel found her seated, hair loose, knees covered by blanket woven by singing crane. He didn't speak of meeting, didn't mention strategy, only approached and sat facing her. "I'm afraid," Sarah said quietly. "Me too," he confessed. Silence between them was dense, charged with everything unsaid, everything contained. Wind blew lightly, lifting tent fabric with whisper. Nathaniel took her hand, not with impulse, not with desire, with certainty. His fingers enveloped her like one embracing something fragile and valuable. "Stay," he said quietly, "not as prisoner, as wife." Sarah looked at him, didn't blink. Her eyes filled with contained moisture but didn't cry. "Do you know what that means?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "I know there's no name for what we are, no rules explaining us. But if world's going to burn out there, I want to burn with you." She smiled for first time in days. It was slight smile, broken, but alive. Fire burning between them needed no promises. It was made of gazes, shared nights without touching, words translated with effort, children laughing in two languages, wounds still hurting but no longer bleeding. Outside, cold returned, but inside that tent, that night, warmth of living was stronger than any threat. While letters stained with lies slept hidden in Nathaniel's bag, truth was weaving little by little in ways Sarah looked at him when no one else looked. Because in that wounded land not all who breathed were alive, but they were. They were alive and had decided to fight to keep being so. Fog descended like thick blanket over slopes, wrapping treetops and hiding traces of those moving silently through paths. There were no drums or shouts, only sound of forest breathing with contained chest. Plan that Nathaniel and chiefs had traced in vigil nights, now wove with same delicacy used to cross ancient loom, without error margin, without doubt space. Confederates climbed confident, armed, with precise orders. They didn't expect resistance. They'd read reports, studied hand-drawn route maps, memorized mountain refuge descriptions. They believed they'd reach mountain men's heart, like reaching end of already traveled road. But they didn't know terrain had changed, that traps weren't in ground but in trees, in cliffs, in silences. Ambush was quick, precise, painful. Arrows from above, rocks falling on flanks, false routes leading to dead-end canyons. Combat didn't last more than an hour. Soldiers' screams echoed like disoriented echoes, directionless. Some fled, others lay among brush with empty gaze. Nathaniel was wounded in shoulder by bullet. He didn't fall. He kept fighting until last Confederate retreated, crawling among stones with eyes reddened by fear. Only then, when battle was finished, did his body give way. Sarah found him leaning against tree, blood-staining tunic. She said no word. She knelt beside him, cleaned wound with cold water, tore part of skirt to improvise bandage. He didn't complain. His eyes, though tense with pain, looked at her with tenderness of one knowing he remained alive for something more than luck. "It's over," she murmured serenely. "You're here now." During following days, Sarah didn't separate from his side. She changed bandages, fed him broths that Singing Crane prepared with healing herbs, helped him sit when pain overcame him. In her gestures was no obligation, but silent love, contained, like water sprouting without noise, but never stopping flowing. While Nathaniel healed, children took their first steps. It was clear morning with sun filtering through branches and birdsong as backdrop. Mary was first. She let go of Sarah's hand and advanced so bravely toward her father sitting on stone, watching her with almost incredulous smile. Then brothers imitated her, one after another, among clumsy laughter and soft falls. Clan gathered in circle to witness that moment. They didn't say much, only watched, but their gazes no longer were cold. In their eyes was something that wasn't there before, respect, recognition, and silent peace growing with each passing day, without blood or threats. One afternoon, while Nathaniel slept and children played near tent, Sarah took out Edmund's notebook. She held it between hands like one holding memory that still hurts. It was thick leather notebook with cracked edges and worn borders. It had resisted blood, rain, time, but still preserved its weight, still carried within words she hadn't wanted to read. She sat by fire, opened first page. Her name written with firm stroke, below a date, then description that didn't belong to her. White woman, Creole, manipulative character, cunning in appearance and dangerous if given power. Sarah swallowed, turned page. More lies, more phrases wrapped in poison. It accused her of seducing mountain leader to survive, teaching tactics to enemy, raising half-breed children with intentions of infiltrating white community. Heart pounded forcefully, but she didn't cry. She kept reading. She found route descriptions of camp, children's names, hideout sketches, notes about Winter Hawk, about Nathaniel, about Elders' Council. Edmund had recorded every conversation, every movement, as if dealing with chess pieces on board only he understood, all with sole purpose of selling that information to highest bidder. Reaching last page, Sarah felt something inside her break, not from pain, from fatigue, from carrying too long with others' words. She rose, walked to camp center, lit small bonfire, placed notebook among flames, watched it burn without blinking. Pages folded slowly, leather crackled, ink dissolved into smoke. "You own nothing anymore," she murmured, "not even my memories." Nathaniel watched her from shadow. He said nothing but knew, seeing her, that woman no longer carried weight on back, that she'd released it, that now she walked with her own name. That night, clan elders summoned her. They spoke with respect, offered something more than words. They offered belonging. They told her they could give new name, one reflecting not what she'd been, but what she'd chosen to be. Sarah accepted. She knelt before fire and listened to ancient song, Singing Crane intoned, blessings pronounced quietly, drums marking birth of something new. Name was pronounced solemnly. Mountain Rose, she who chooses life among ruin. That same night, under full moon, her union with Nathaniel was celebrated. There was no priest, no rings, no papers, only intertwined hands, deep gazes, songs rising to sky like wordless promises. Women danced in circle, men beat drums to heart's rhythm, children laughed among trees, and amid all Sarah and Nathaniel took each other's hands, as if world had finally stopped to let them begin. They made no oaths, promised no eternities, only looked at each other. In that gaze was everything, past, pain, struggle, but also future and hope, because some names are forgotten and others are born with fire. In northern settlements, where wind whispers among tall pines and mountains seem to touch sky with snowy peaks, some travelers still speak of story not written in books, but in grandparents' memory and elders' songs. It's not mentioned on maps, doesn't figure in war archives. It's legend floating among campfire smoke, among echoes leaking through cave cracks. It speaks of white woman with honey-colored eyes who walked among mountain men not as prisoner or foreigner, but as sister, It speaks of chief feared by soldiers who stopped being Iron Bear to be man, and of 3 half-breed children who learned to run between 2 worlds without completely belonging to either, but claiming both with head high. A white traveler with notebook in hand and hair gathered under dusty hat noted that story in her diary during starry night beside fire lit by stranger hands. She asked no names, only listened. She sat beside woman whose face was already furrowed by deep lines and hair speckled with white. Beside her, man with still firm shoulders and dark gaze held her hand without squeezing, with peace not learned but achieved. "Are you the woman from the tale?" asked traveler, almost in whisper. Old woman didn't respond immediately. She looked at horizon. It was afternoon of burning sky, where sun began descending among mountains, tinting stones intense, deep red, as if earth remembered ancient oath. "I'm not what they say," she finally responded, "but neither am I what I was." Beside her, man nodded. He needed no words. His presence sufficed. They walked together to Hill's summit, where wind blew more forcefully, and memories became clearer. Their steps were slow but constant. He offered arm and she took it naturally, like one who'd been doing it lifetime. In distance, 3 figures watched them. One, tall, with firm face, held spear carved by his own hands. It was Benjamin, now man of deep gaze, skilled hunter, defender of his people. Beside him, Thomas, more reserved, with book under arm and bead necklace hanging from neck, observed group with eyes knowing to listen before judging. Third, Mary, braided hair while smiling. Her clothes combined indigenous embroidery with cotton fabrics woven in neighboring towns. In her was perfect mixture between fire and tenderness. All 3 were living testimony of story no one dared deny, though few knew how to tell it exactly. Some assured woman had been sold as slave. Others said she was kidnapped, that she'd bewitched chief with golden gaze. Some called her traitor, others mother of 2 worlds. Truth, as always, was elsewhere. Sarah stopped at cliff's edge. At her feet, valley extended until lost in horizon. Trees swayed slowly. River shone in distance like silver ribbon. Beside her, Nathaniel breathed deeply. His hair, now graying, flew with wind. Wrinkles on face told more than any tale could write. "Do you remember?" she asked without looking at him. "I remember everything," he responded. Sun's light descended little by little. Sky became crimson. Clouds seemed to ignite silently, and air acquired that warm, solemn tone of farewells that don't hurt, but close cycles. Sarah gently squeezed Nathaniel's arm. "This time, there's nothing to fear," she whispered. He didn't respond with words, only placed hand over hers, and together they remained there silently like 2 figures stopped in time. They needed no talk of battles, flights, losses, nor of wounds history had left in their bodies. They'd conquered fear, not with weapons, but with life. Below in camp, grandchildren ran among tents. Singing Crane was no longer there, neither many of old ones, but songs still heard at nightfall. Every time someone asked about that honey-eyed woman who spoke mountain tongue with different accent, old women looked at each other, smiled and said, "She has no name, she gave it to fire." Traveler closed notebook with trembling hands. She noted last phrase before storing diary in bag. "I never knew if it was true, but if it was, that love defied the world." Sun hid completely behind mountains, and in shadow of last red glow still drew silhouettes of Sarah and Nathaniel, standing on earth that had united them, looking at horizon, owing them nothing more, because some loves need no explanation, only to be lived until the end. There are tales not forgotten because they transform us. In Shadow of Red Sun is one of them, not only for what it tells, but for what it awakens in those who hear it. It's not simply love story between 2 worlds. It's proof that life, even in darkest chapters, can reignite if there's someone willing to fight for it. Sarah taught us that no sword needed to be strong, no surname needed to belong, that one can renounce past without forgetting who one is, that loving in purest form is resisting without violence, caring without asking, looking without possessing. Nathaniel reminded us that truly brave men are those who dare to feel and choose peace, even after knowing war. If this story touched your heart, let us know. Tell us in comments what part moved you most, what you learned from Sarah and Nathaniel. If you reached here, write word "decide" in comments. That way we'll know you're part of those who feel each word, each gesture, each whisper of this story. Don't forget that in cards, we're leaving more tales like this, full of deep emotions, unforgettable characters, and loves defying time. Stories that don't just entertain but leave mark. Subscribe, share, and above all, keep believing that true love can still change destiny, because sometimes just one decision suffices to begin again.